Good evening. Our reader for this evening's Johnny James Reading Series program is Sally Herrin. She currently teaches creative writing at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and she's also the senior poetry reader at the Prairie Schooner. She's had many of her poems published, and her most recent one
And I'm going to read that most recent fiction. Actually, this is my first published fiction, so it's real special to me. And it's dedicated to our friend Warren Fine, who isn't with us anymore. And it's called Little Saigon. One morning in early summer, one of these older ladies stopped the boss to tell him something. He left the truck idling in the alley. Wardell and I were throwing plastic sacks in the back. She wanted to know if we'd seen her dog, a brown setter. "No, ma'am," said the boss, fingering his seed cap. "It's these boat people," she told us. She had on an old blue wrapper and a net over her little rag of blue hair. "It's just not like lady to worry me. Mrs. Pavelka's dog disappeared last month. It's those teenage boys. I think they steal them. They steal them and they sell them." "Gee," said the boss, who looks like Gary Cooper, if he'd been through a real war, done all his own stunt work, and lived to be an old plug who still didn't have 2 words to say. He's lived all his life in the one town, veteran of Korea, pays cash. Good man to work for, but not much for meeting the public. "Don't worry, ma'am," he said sincerely. "I'm sure your dog will come home." I swung up on the back of the truck with Wardell. "They probably done eat it," he said. "Oh, give me a break." "I'm serious," said Wardell. "In the Orient, dog is a delicacy." He smiled. The boss escaped from the old lady and got in the cab, popped the clutch, and we lurched away. "In China," yelled Wardell, clinging to the tailgate as we jounced down the alley, eating our own dust, "rich men eat dog on their birthday." Between O Street and Vine, there's a 6-block stretch of 27th Street with 4 Oriental markets. They're mom-and-pop joints, and they often name them after their hometowns: Ah Long, Vien Dao, Ayutthaya. The stores are practically closets with high teetering shelves and every kind of thing for sale. Rice cakes and postcards, dolls, fish paste, movie magazines, bee pollen, unguent, noodles, and things that look too odd to think about. 27th cuts the poor part of town in 2. To the west is the home for the afflicted and a lot of black people with their rib shack and barber shop. To the east are poor folks of all kinds: college students, white women with brown babies, more blacks, old people, Vietnamese, Cambodians, and a darker race I can't name. There's no municipal collection in this town. Everybody has to contract with a private service or take it to the dump themselves. And it's wonderful what people throw away. One afternoon I watched a kid and his older sister throw hundreds of stereo records out of the back of an old green pickup, skimming them like frisbees at the gulls screaming over the dump. Another time the neighbor woman told me as a joke to bring her home a lamp, so I asked her what color. "How about yellow?" she said, and I brought her home a yellow lamp. Her husband rewired it, and they've got it in their living room yet. We hit the alleys at dawn, the boss and a black man named Wardell and me. For the other side of the tracks, it's a real nice neighborhood, good trees, a half-dozen American elms that survived the plague years, big frame and brick houses built around the turn of the century up to the 30s until the Great Depression put shut to all that. I stood one day on the street to count the kids on the porch of one high green house. I made out 17. A guy washing his Mustang by the curb looked at me over his shades and laughed. "These only the least ones, the rest in school." The refugees live 2 and 3 families to the house, or else they have a different idea of family. Many children, the women old and young in their long skirts and headscarves and straw hats, Lots of teenagers. I notice there aren't too many middle-aged men. The young ones all have cars, beat-up Chevs and Buicks around 15 years old, or at least bicycles. In warm weather, you can hear the top 40 they love and Vietnamese music, too, in a spooky mix. Then about every block has a few old couples, maybe a widow or a couple divorcees, holdovers from the 40s and before. They set their garbage in little brick pens against the dogs. Their yards are as clean as stovetops. Lots of people in this town make gardens, sweet corn, cukes, zucchini, plenty of tomatoes. But these Vietnamese gardens are way out of their league. The old women are garden geniuses. They don't waste a thing. Every scrap goes back on for compost, and the beds are shored up with brick and cement block and boards they pull down from old garages in the alley. They grow roots with lacy tops, knee-deep greens, eggplant, many kinds of squashes and peas, yams, flowering things and herbs, everything growing jammed up, not an inch for a weed to show its ugly head, all watered by hand-carried can, thriving like somebody's life depended on it. Right in the middle of this one garden, one of these old refugee ladies built a shrine. That is, she supervised the bunch of teenage boys who did the work. For days they were pouring concrete and laying brick, jeans rolled up and slipping off their skinny hips. The base was about 3 feet high, and it had a lot of Vietnamese words on it spelled out in the kind of letters people use on mailboxes. At first we thought it might be a base for a satellite dish. But when it was done, there was a white plaster Jesus standing up to the morning sun, bright red heart clasped to his breast in his white hands. One day Wardell said to me, "I guess it was a lot of Catholics in Vietnam on account of the French, you think?" "Could be," I said. "Never thought about it." "Kennedy was a Catholic. How come he never went to Nam like LBJ did? Didn't want to call no attention to the family resemblance?" "And the Mafia are Catholics, too, so what? And the conquistadors. Catholics are everywhere." "I'm not talking about the Mafia," he said. "It's just, a curiosity. All those monks barbecuing themselves, you remember? I keep thinking about that Mama saying, or somebody praying, 'Let me over that embassy wall. Lord Jesus, don't let the boat sink. Please take me on dry land, Captain. Whenever I get my ass to the U.S. of A., I swear I'll put you up a totem pole, sweet Jesus, Savior of my soul.'" About a week later, the dog lady met us by her garage with a couple of policemen. She'd had them investigating the cans in her alley, and now she wanted them to search our truck. The boss protested. "I give you my word, I got nothing in there but trash. I told you I'd tell you if we saw your dog." She was all puffed up with grief and civic outrage. "Mrs. Sloane's cat has been gone since Thursday night," she said. "I want to get to the bottom of this." "You want us to comb through all that?" Wardell spit. The boss appealed to the cops. "I got a schedule," he said. "People don't like to look at their trash. That's why they pay me." But cops can't just ignore a complaint. That's what they're paid for. And anyway, it's not in their temperament. "It ain't in my contract," said Wardell, moving away from the truck. He jerked his chin at me. "His either. No way." We don't have any contract, but we went and stood over by somebody else's garage while the boss and the cops dragged sacks out of the truck and opened them. Then the boss put on his waders and climbed in with the loose stuff, poking around while the cops stuck their heads over the side. "What a Tom," said Wardell. "He's not even black, Wardell, which makes him a chucklehead as well as a Tom." The cops were nearly gagging. They didn't find anything. Just paper, cans, rotten food and shitty diapers, broken glass, different kinds of dusty crud and slime, the regular stuff. Dogs are always after the cans, rolling them over to get the lids off. One morning we came on a German shepherd gnawing at a chunk of meat in a brown paper sack. "Get out of here, dog shit," said Wardell, kicking him away. I bent down to pick up the sack and saw what it was. "Woe to Jesus," said Wardell. It was the head of a dog, skinned out and pretty old. It still had eyes, but the ears were gone, and you couldn't really tell what breed it was. Wardell yelled for the boss. God dog, he said, hanging in his blue jeans there like a tree that can't decide which way to fall. Then he took Wardell's shovel and flipped the head into the truck. He looked at me, then Wardell, like he was daring us to twitch. That wasn't her dog, he said. No, sir, I said. A Vietnamese kid, little girl in a skimpy dress and cowboy boots, stood over by a clothesline, watching us with her eyes like cups of black tea. The boss got in the cab and slammed the door. He called out the window, "And cover it up, quick." I did, and then grabbed on for my dear life as the boss jammed into reverse and backed wildly down the alley, bell ringing like a frantic leper. The dog lady kept stopping us to tell us to watch for animal remains. She was keeping a census of all the disappeared pets. She made some signs with Lady's picture and tacked them on phone poles over the ads for garage sales. Soon the old people on her block were all keeping their cats and dogs indoors, and the meter man and delivery boys were taking the long way around to keep from meeting her, nervous as nits. We caught her poking in her neighbor's cans. The Vietnamese don't throw away too much. A little paper, a few jars. You can tell a lot about people by what they throw away. It's just another kind of archaeology. Then one morning we pulled into the alley with a black and white right behind us. The dog lady was hovering over her own garbage can, and she was wild. "Look," she yelled. "You men, look here." The can was filled with parts of dogs, legs and heads mostly, some partly frozen. There was a headless half, ribs and shoulders, plenty of meat, but gone off, I guess. The joker responsible had included a whole possum, roadkill, and extra high. "Proof?" she said. "You want proof? Here it is. Scientific proof." We helped the cops check out all the other cans in the alley. They didn't seem anxious to start knocking at random on the back doors. Nobody was even out that morning. No kids, no dogs, no mama-sons. Just the blinded windows of the houses and Jesus in his garden with his heart in his hands. The sky was one smeary cloud and a lot of wind threatening rain. The boss offered to take the dog parts away, but the cops said they had to take them in to make their report. The dog lady gave one cop her statement in her loud old vinegar voice while Wardell held the bag and I forked the evidence in. "You want the possum too?" I asked the other cop, all spit polish and stiff blue shirt, who was kind of gauging us out of the corner of his eye. "It's all evidence." "Man," Wardell said to no one, tying off the bags, "I would not have his job." The boss took us to breakfast. He was a long time washing his hands, then came and sat down in the booth by Wardell. He took off his seed cap and scratched his big head. "Well, and I don't know what to think about those people," he said at last. "You guys think they really eat them dogs?" "Indians up on the reservation eat dog, or they used to," I said. "They eat dog in Africa, Wardell?" "Your mouth, white folks," he said. He lit a cigarette and sighted down its length at me. "I don't mean to sound like a bigot, but what do you think a bunch of refugees care about a pack of stinking dogs?" "This ain't Vietnam," said the boss. "These dogs are pets. Some of these old folks, their dog is all they got. You can't eat people's pets, for Christ's sake." "Let me tell you something," said Wardell. "These folks have cockroaches for pets. They be having motherfucking rats for their pets. And they won't always be eating your dogs either. The kids grow up watching TV, be going to your schools. Pretty soon they start to think eating dogs not cool. They learn how to be American, act just like you and me." The cafe windows faced 27th. Outside, the broad street intersected the railroad tracks, then ran south towards O Street, lined with thrift stores, laundromats. One story and everything the color of dust under the uncertain sky. A man on a bike bumped over the tracks. A woman in a long skirt pulling a child in a wagon stooped to look into a store window. A pickup with muddy fenders and crates of live chickens in back rolled by. Inside it was cool and the boss leaned his head against the window. "I don't understand," he said. "Hey," said Wardell, "in a few years these refugees be sorry. They will be sorry they ate your dogs. It's just, sorry take time. We sorry now about all that napalm. Folks sorry now Martin and Bobby and them got killed. These folks going to be sorry too, man, and sorry take time. Okay. That was the first story. I got another story and a prose poem for you this evening. This one's called The Omnivores, and it's another Lincoln story. Actually, this is all Lincoln writing tonight. The Omnivores. I was lying in the chair at the dental college, laid out like an animal for vivisection. A simple checkup. Now, a halo of expert faces ringed my vision against the overhead light. They all agreed I should have my wisdom teeth out. "What's wrong with him?" I asked through somebody's fingers. They told me the teeth themselves were sound. There's plenty of room in my mouth, no gum disease, my bite not endangered. But the dentists, students, and instructors alike agreed my wisdom teeth would probably give me trouble someday. In any case, I would never get a better deal on the extraction, financially. In the waiting room, my husband agreed. He'd had his wisdom teeth out years ago. "You'll never miss them," he told me. "What do you mean?" I said. "Of course I'll miss them. I'd never had any of my parts out before. Tonsils, adenoids, appendix. I've managed to remain intact, except for haircuts, nail parings, and my virginity, which, if I understand the model in the gynecologist's office, was mostly an abstraction anyway. I'm a set, a complete set." But I made an appointment for Monday of the following week. Then, by coincidence, I saw my friends Greg and Harry on consecutive days. Greg was in his office when I went to borrow a book. I guess I seemed a little blue because he started fooling around, showing me all the ways he knew how to tie a bandana. He rolled it into a cord and tied it horizontally around his head, a simple sweatband. Folded diagonally and tied behind the base of the skull, the babushka. Same fold but tied lower on the brow, point sticking up behind the hypothalamus. Motorcycle thug. Four corners tied to make a bag-like cap. One of the brothers. He sighed. "I want to grow a beard like Whitman had," he said, "but the wind makes my hair break off." I told him how I was going to have my wisdom teeth pulled, even though there was nothing wrong with them. Pull good teeth? No, he couldn't believe it. "I still have mine." He wiggled his jaw. "Who are these people that tell you stuff like that?" Somehow Greg and Harry never got together, which is odd because this is only a mid-sized college town, and a shame because they're both from upstate New York, both Ukrainian stock, both artists, one poet, one painter. Next day, when I told Harry about my wisdom teeth, he and I were smoking a contemplative joint in the one-horse barn by the alley where he painted. "That doesn't seem right," he said, patting his beard. He frowned at a painting of a Holstein cow, one of many he made the summer his wife was pregnant with their son. He'd ripped out most of the loft and let a skylight into the north face of the roof. The light fell down a scant 2 stories to the silvery spattered planks of the studio floor. Bare studs were tacked over with dozens of Polaroids of Harry behind his beard, Donna in profile, their kids, cows. Along the ledges and sills everywhere lay bird and mouse skulls, insect specimens, the carapace and wings, jasper and chalcedony pebbles, ranks of toy soldiers, and lead or cellulose painted in full kit by hand. "It seems like an odd thing to do," he said. "I don't know. The wisdom teeth. I still have mine." I told the neighbor couple about my coming ordeal. They'd had theirs out. Mike said, "It's nothing, but don't let them send you home with just Tharvons. Get something to make you sleep." Kathy described an infection, an unspeakable crap that ran for days from the sockets. They agreed with my husband and the experts, though. "Have 'em out. You'll never get a better deal than the dental college gives you, financially." By Friday, I felt bad. My teeth. I could imagine them, roots still faintly pulsing, lying in a bloody dish. Maybe the Ukrainians knew something the rest of us didn't. Some half-remembered truth from the old country. Pull the truth, melt with Ruth. This thought cheered me, so I dwelt on it, and pretty soon I manufactured the gumption to cancel that appointment. The receptionist was irritated on the phone. Patients who refuse prescribed procedures, she said ominously, can't come back to the dental college. Not ever, not even to have your teeth cleaned. That's fine, I said, and I still have all my teeth. I was married then to a neon sign repairman with messianic ambitions. An old frame house that had been rented to a decade of college boys was what we could afford. The porch hung off the front like a twisted grin. The house had belonged to an old lady before the slumlords, and in spring her strawberries still wrestled up through the dead grass. We weeded and plastered holes, hung wallpaper, put in a wood stove. We ground our own coffee and drank it with the neighbors. My husband built a new electrical board for the community radio station. I volunteered at the food co-op. We went to potluck suppers and planted one cottonwood tree. Now, I came up in the South, and I cook like it. To tell the truth, that's one reason my husband married me. The first time he came to supper, I laid myself out to dish up a world-class down-home meal. Biscuit and greens, sweet potato, fricassee of pheasant. A neighbor boy was always bringing me game because his mama didn't like it in her kitchen. Another time I made a duck and oyster gumbo, black with filet powder they send me from home. My husband was no slouch of a cook himself. He made a fragrant lentil stew and on weekends buckwheat cakes with real butter and real maple. He was very serious about what he called whole food, and I began to think about it too. We started reading Gandhi's autobiographies aloud to each other. I was an old Peace March type. He'd come to the movement late, but heavy. He was terribly stirred by accounts of the peace collective that gathered wherever Gandhi worked, how simply everyone lived, as if with one heart. My husband's face tightened with excitement as he spoke of these things. He wanted to live in a peace community, and he wanted to be a pillar. I can build anything, he told me. I can wire anything, weld, frame houses, I can farm. I'll offer my work to our neighbors and friends on a barter basis. We'll sell your car and stick to bicycles. He thought we should become vegetarians. He made very good arguments: cholesterol, pressure on the land, global economy. Then, as if apropos of nothing, he told me a story. He and his brothers would combine wheat every summer during his high school years. There was a bird, slow, long-legged, a water bird that nested sometimes in the wheat. He told me he would purposely run the blades of the combine over these birds, severing their legs, just to see them try to run on their wings. That's pretty bad, I said. I recalled the time my brother popped a mockingbird with the new BB gun on his 11th birthday. I myself put salt on a slug when I was 6 to see if it would really melt. Quite the karmic debt, I admitted. I told him I'd try to give up meat. Our vegetarian experiment deeply depressed our dog. I was a little more enthusiastic. I baked big earthy breads, made stuffed cabbage, ratatouille, 6 kinds of macaroni casserole. I blew out my blender grinding garbanzo beans. I was feeding the dog dry food, trying to liven things up for her with eggs and milk. We weren't hardcore, but she got in the way of going after other people's garbage cans. Since then, it's been her lifelong Jones, and even today, when she gets plenty of ham bones and chicken scraps in her own dish, she brings home coffee cans of bacon fat and the carcasses of spoilt fish. The summer we were married, our cat killed 6 or 7 robins in a single day. Not babies, just distracted young adults, until I started taking them away from her and turning them under a spade of soil on the compost pile. Next day she was out in the yard again, and I saw her take down another robin. She eyed the back door and ran around the side of the house, dragging the limp bird. I went over to the window in the front room and watched her stash it under a big burdock I'd left grow by the ratty picket fence. I found 4 more under that dock plant by evening. None of this killing bothered our cat, but I didn't eat a green grape for years on account of Cesar Chavez. We fretted over coffee and bananas, not to mention marijuana, as cash crops from poor countries that ought to be feeding their own instead of making the bosses rich. How could we participate? Better to eat only what grows where we live, save transporting, and hope there's still some kind of sentimental magic between us and the earth. Some way local air and water and angle of the sun tell growing things what to serve up in their roots and fruits. Some music in the cycles of kneading and feeding. But how could we give up coffee and bananas? And what about what intensive farming can do to the fragile plains land? Vegetables are alive too, I pointed out, Japanese steel in hand, standing over the carnage of carrots and potatoes for the stew. My husband said, "It isn't the same." It isn't. Still, I thought, I'll never save the world sprouting mung beans. The new foods were good but strange to me. I started to get hungry for something that tasted like home. So I walked down to the grocery in the black part of town and brought back a mess of collards. I had my doubts about cooking them without salt meat. They're so strong. But I thought I could try. My husband took over in the kitchen, steamed the greens, and then sautéed them with egg and vinegar, kind of a wilted salad approach. They were disgusting. I gagged on the first forkful. My husband was putting them away like he couldn't tell the difference. I guess he couldn't, or maybe he was just strong-minded. I carried my plate out in the yard and scraped the greens into the compost. I hung on the gate and looked out across those tidy Midwestern backyards, all maple and lilac and hackberry, no camellia, no azalea, not even a Japanese magnolia in sight. It was deep green evening, the wind wringing out the foliage for its sweetness, cut grass, black loam, an edge of alfalfa from the prairie outside of town. I had a pain in my breast, a feather knife, the feeling we called in childhood wanting our mother. Next day, I got up in a mood. I opened the refrigerator and looked with loathing at the yogurt. "I'm not hungry," I told my husband. "I'm going to take the dog for a walk." The walk ended downtown at a cafe where I bought myself a big country breakfast, hash browns, fried eggs, nice piece of steak. I ate every bite, and it was good, and it nourished me. After the waitress took away my plate, I sat in the booth and drank coffee. I watched the farmers and framing crews in their boots and seed caps, waitresses taking their order pads from leather holsters, wagon wheels hung for chandeliers. For the first time in some time, I felt I might belong in this beat little prairie town. And I thought, too, I would buy some grits on my way home. My husband backed off a little after that. I still baked our bread, but now and then a pie crust with lard, real flaky. I'd braise a couple pork chops or make chicken with dumplings, and my husband didn't seem to mind too much. I knew that feedlots and nitrates and steroids concerned him, but he got to where he didn't have to talk about them every day. Harry said he noticed a change. He said our house had a cleaner aura. He'd bring over a few beers and we'd sit at the big maple table, the three of us talking. He told us that his family's made sausage for about 500 years, and his grandma was the prune pastry queen of the Hudson River Valley. Harry was the one that taught me to see the prairie, and therefore to love it. I was missing my Piedmont and bayou, the shape and heartbreaking lushness of the South I left and can't ever seem to get back to. Harry's gone back now to fulfill his destiny as a painter of the Catskills after the Flemish manner. But when he lived in Nebraska, he painted Nebraska. Other places have mountains, bodies of water, he told me. Nebraska has the weather and land shaped like sea. He drove us out of town to see the clouds from Mount St. Helens on the third day after the eruption. There is no way to tell about those angels of color, their passage into night, but a person could try to paint it, and Harry did. "No, no, no," my husband was saying. "You don't get the point. We're in control of our evolution now. We can choose." "No offense, but I don't want you or anyone else controlling my evolution. Food is more than micronutrients and amino acids, said Harry. You sound like a scientist with your protein balancing. And anyway, a good scientist would tell you to look at your teeth. Your teeth will tell you what you need to eat. But if we want to lead the planet to nonviolence, my husband said, we have to be nonviolent ourselves. Don't be such a chauvinist. You think animals have a copyright on sensation? Life eats life. Or are you divorcing yourself from the animals, too? We need to be engineers of the quality of life, said my husband. Spiritual engineers. Food, my friend, said Harry, is culture. It's like art and sex. Continuity is in relatedness, not just duration. As for me, I have decided I'm going to be a European papa. From now on, I will make mayonnaise from scratch every Sunday afternoon. I said amen to that. I like old-fashioned everything. Antiques, overgrown trees. I set my table with china like my grandmother's. Everything she had got sold at an auction, so I buy what I can at the thrift stores. Make cornbread by her recipe in enamel tin pans. I have her hairline and her god-awful love of books. She seemed so sane to me, living in the frame house on the farm where she was born and widowed, putting by, making do, rereading the novels of John Galsworthy with her garden and her quilts, and her German Bible laden with receipts her father, the old doctor, had stuck away. Born, male child to James Doty, bushel potatoes, and whooping cough, R. Smith and family, 40-quart tomato preserve. The orchard, the well which never ran dry, 80 acres of the finest sweet corn land in Indiana. Just a country school teacher, but she had what she needed. I thought so anyway. So how could I refuse when Harry and my husband proposed to get a live turkey for Thanksgiving? My grandmother raised and dressed her own chickens for 80 years. My mother remembered marathon butchering, gutting 100 capons in an afternoon with her useful child-sized hands. One of my own earliest memories is of watching my uncle wring a chicken's neck. I was about 2. When the chicken and dumplings came around that night at supper, I am told, I flapped my elbows and dangled my neck brokenly, squawking and squawking. I'll clean it, I said. I'll cook it, but I won't kill it. You ought to be willing to kill what you eat, said my husband. I'm not as old a soul as you, I said. A week before Turkey Day, Greg got us ours at the same place he got his own, a farm near Beaver Crossing, where the flock fed on organic corn. Greg swore to me that when he opened the gate of the pen where the turkeys waited for fate, this fat Tom stepped forward, right into the burlap bag. Greg left him for me in a dog shipping crate in our woodshed. My husband came home from work that evening and went out to see the turkey for a few minutes. He came in looking real proud. As for the bird, that fool thought he'd come to turkey heaven. Neighbor cats as well as our own crouched on the woodpile in the shed to watch him. At first this gave him stage fright and he picked around blinking and complaining. After a couple of days he settled down, accepted the situation. Meantime, I was bringing him pans of chopped cabbage and millet, all he could eat. He got to where he'd greet me, gobble, gobble, gobble. I thought about taking him down to the creek a few blocks from our house and letting him go, but he was such a dumb guy. I felt sure he'd freeze or starve or get torn apart by some dog. Besides, I would have to carry him and feel him all alive, his heartbeat, his spastic wings. At 10 Thanksgiving morning, Harry showed up. Donna would come over later with their kids and pies. He'd shaved off his beard and mustache for the occasion. We smoked a ceremonial bowl of pot at the maple table while my husband sharpened our best knife on his Arkansas stone. We walked outside to the woodshed. It was bright cold, ripe for football, hunting. Harry steadied a large aluminum ladder against the side of the house. My husband went into the shed, opened the crate, and lifted the turkey in his arms. He carried it, pecking and fluttering, to the ladder and supported it while Harry tied its feet to an eye-level rung with heavy twine. Harry took the turkey's head in his brown hand. I had never looked closely at the turkey's head until that minute. The rattled skin was incredibly beautiful, a veining of rich blue and old rose like a Renaissance sunset. My husband held the struggling turkey in his arms. Harry took the knife and in a long moment severed the turkey's head. Then time bellied out in slow-mo. With a terrific seizure, the headless turkey burst from my husband's arms, dragging the ladder over, stout heart shouting, blood everywhere. Then the twine gave and the body was free. Harry stood with the knife in one hand, staring at the head in the other. Harry with his new naked face and the head blinking in profound surprise, the beak slowly stuttering its alarm. I turned to watch my husband lope with a dreamy languor across the backyard, through the empty tomato cages after the headless turkey, a cartwheel now of feathers and blood. Then I noticed our little cat stood transfixed by the corner of the house. I could see she was seeing everything I saw and more, thinking, the animal inquisition has begun. I reached for her, but she turned and scat. Didn't come home for 3 days. And I have one more short piece to read to you. This is a sort of a prose poem. I don't really know what to call it. It's part of a novel that I've been working on all my life, but anyway. But it's like a prose poem, sir. And it's called Let Me Tell You About Slim. Thank whatever has done at least this much for us, that there are still in this world big, bad, old black men, and by bad I mean good, to play the blues. Slim is big, every way but fat. Bigger than basketball big, bigger than football, big enough to do real work, whatever he might have to do. Raise beams, wrestle mules, work steel. And he is big enough to be gentle and big enough to play the blues, to bring his thick, efficient hands to this job of work. Slim plays his guitar like he is killing chickens, with great tenderness and no hesitation, all his energy in his hands, face still, eyes half-lidded. He rocks slightly from the knees like an old Jew davening, while Nathan on the drums lays down a pulse that bleeds back from the mills of Gary, through the gins of Memphis, to the talking skins of that homeland we call Africa because we don't know any better. And all the time Slim is killing his chickens without rancor, with unspeakable dispatch. And Nick is there too on bass, hanging just a heart hair behind, a witness, not a bystander but an affirmation. Go ahead, Slim. You go on killing them chickens. That's what we're here for. Never mind about the blood. Nick is big, too. Tall as Slim almost, but lanky, with tired eyes and slender, ingenious fingers. While Slim is killing chickens, Nick is going fishing. He is standing in the shade of a granddaddy oak, but he's not drifting. He's witnessing, long fingers paying out that line, untangling the knots, feeling for the kiss on the hook, keeping the line alive. Then let me tell you about John, younger than the rest and littler than anybody but Nathan. Nathan drumming the whole history of mankind through the rhythm of the many kinds of work. John's what you might call an understudy, but the blues is not Broadway, and if Slim were to fall ill, John would not glory, but just go to work to try to fill his shoes, even while he knew it could not be done. The man is not replaceable. John could never kill Slim's chickens. We start from there. John is who he is, does what he does, a little more ambivalent, suffers a little more in his consciousness of the audience of mostly white college kids who drink too fast, talk too loud, don't know enough to be quite reverent about these blues. So John tries to help them get down. He's stirring the big iron pot as it's coming up to boil. Here, he says, holding out his ladle, have yourselves a taste. Are you hungry for the blues, says John, now one time. And a few who stop to hear give back a ragged, yeah. John steps closer to the mic and tries again. Are you ready to hear the blues, he says. Now tell me 2 times. And a little louder comes back, yeah, yeah. John's got heart. But it makes him tired all the same to see his life ahead in bar after bar, blacks thinning like endangered game, old hippies and blues freaks dying out or going dry, always a new crop of white faces, country club goddesses, guys just off the tractor or out from behind a banker's fence. He breaks a string and almost makes a dirty joke, then thinks better of it, and still, there's nothing John would rather do. After 2-3 songs, Slim rises from the bar where he's been drinking with the AP chief and the owner. He shoulders but gently through his crowd and steps up on the stage, takes up his guitar, slips on the strap, nods royally and starts in to play. Slim can sing, and he does, deep, maybe not as deep as you'd expect, but from somewhere due south of his heart. He is a piece down that road already. Everything John is worrying about has already happened to him. But Slim doesn't carry an ounce of dread in his body. Not that he's untouched or hard. He just has no dread. Not of the years, not the white faces, not hungry young bluesmen, hotel rooms, or restaurant food. No dread of change or goodbyes or light talk or drunks. Certainly not of the chickens he's bound to kill. His other name is Magic, and that's no shit. Night after night, across the nation, on the alligator circuit, in Europe, Slim rises from the bar after 2-3 songs, step up on the stage, and starts killing those chickens. He kills them for kings, and he kills them for winos, for kids who've scarcely heard the blues to know what they're hearing, for audiophiles and bar queens, for couples in love, and for fragments of lives, the walking wounded who can hardly remember their names, for the many rest of us inhabitants of the country in between. Slim stands and with his great hands goes on killing his chickens for a room that's nearly empty or a line around the block. He's there killing and killing and killing his chickens. And never for 1 minute is he acting like a star. Is he anything else than a big black man doing the work he knows, feeding the hungry, something most rockers have forgotten, the community too plain in its taste for most jazz. Slim's music is something old in a country half rotten and still new. Slim feeding us, killing his chickens, Slim black and Slim blue.